Welcome to Insights, Ideal's free monthly webinar series, specially designed for parents and families of gifted or twice exceptional learners. In each session, our expert presenters provide homeschooling families with strategies to help their exceptional students thrive. We're delighted to have you with us. And remember, your support through donations is always appreciated.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for coming. This evening, we are honored to have as our guest Dr. Sandra Kaplan. I first met Dr. Kaplan in 1997 in a conference session where I responded to a question she asked with the wrong answer. She quickly set me straight, and I followed her work ever since. She also very graciously served on my dissertation committee and helped me steer that as well. Dr. Kaplan is an award-winning professor from the University of Southern California and a consultant for state education departments and school districts nationwide. She is a past president of the National Association for Gifted Children and the California Association for the Gifted, where she still serves as the chair of the Education and Advisory Committee. She's written 10 books and a plethora of chapters and articles on various educational topics. Dr. Kaplan is especially famous for her work on increasing depth and complexity of curriculum and instruction, and her work, which is the topic we will talk about this evening, scholarliness. So everyone, please welcome my mentor and friend, Dr. Sandra Kaplan.
Thank you so much.
Very much for being here with us, Sandy.
Well, it's my pleasure. And I'm so really in admiration of you and the work that you're doing.
Oh, thank you. Well, students will soon be returning to school. And today our parents would like to know more about scholarliness and how they might help their children develop the habits of a scholar. Can you give them any tips?
Yes, I can. But I have to say something, and that is that one of the things that's really important, I think, in looking at scholarliness or the development of a scholar is to not use giftedness as the main criterion for all behaviors, whether they be intellectual, social, or otherwise. And that what I mean by that is the fact that one of the real differences between being gifted or identified as gifted and being a scholar is how you treat those characteristics that have defined you. So just the definition of giftedness is insufficient. It's what you do with those characteristics. So we were talking about the Olympics. This is a good example. You know, it's not just saying, well, somebody is a good swimmer. You have to see them in the water splashing around to really look at, how the characteristic matches the activity. So one of the things that we know about scholars is that they start to really look at the characteristics that define them and start to look at how they help them learn everywhere all the time. Scholars are not just interested in what happens in a classroom at a particular time in response to one particular activity. It's what you do with that knowledge you glean from the schooling process to every other place that you're involved in. You're learning all the time, whether it's information, informal or whether it's formal. So that's one of the major things I think is to forget just the label and to understand what it is to learn and the characteristics that you have that facilitate that learning.
That's excellent framing for us. Thank you very much. So in light of what you just said, how would you define a scholar?
And again, there are many definitions. There are formal definitions and informal definitions. So one of the things that I want to say is that my definition comes from all those years I've watched students in classrooms, whether they're preschoolers or whether they happen to be in my doctoral, well, I don't mean my doctoral dissertation, but the university's doctoral program. One of the things that I think that really defines a scholar is that you understand that you learn all the time everywhere. That learning is everywhere. It's not just in one place. And that you learn for self-satisfaction, not just for a grade. Those are big differences to me between just being gifted and being a scholar. Scholars are hungry. And sometimes they ask silly questions like, how does that work? Why does it work? And when somebody says, well, don't you know that because you're so smart? You can say, I'm not smart in everything. And so being willing to understand that you can have minuses as well as pluses. And just one other thing about scholarliness, which I hope that I can really emphasize, is they appreciate the process of learning. It's not just drudgery, it's fun. It's fun. And you appreciate that the end of it is not getting an A, it's knowing more or being able to use information in another way.
That's amazing. So it's not about the grade, it's about happiness and joy and satisfaction.
Mhm.
So there is a list that you created, I don't know when, called The Habits of a Scholar. Could you sort of rattle those off?
Sure. I so happen to have them to my left here, lest I forget them. Because every once in a while I have to remind myself,
Oh, I had to look them up. So
But the reason I remind myself is that I am getting into a situation of just proving I'm a professor or am I really a scholar. So, it doesn't make any difference how old you are. Scholarliness is really putting forth effort, understanding that effort is, really how, and somebody once said this to me, which I thought was kind of funny, so I'll repeat it. Somebody I admired greatly when I was going through my educational experience at the university. And he said, Sandy, it's how much effort you put through. It's how the effort, it's not how easy it comes. And I said, but if you're smart, shouldn't it be easy? He said, no, if you're smart, it should become effortful. It should be something that you indulged in, that you've submersed in. So that's where the effort comes in. Secondly, it's developing curiosity, that you never become blase. Oh, I know it, or that's easy. And I see a lot of those affectations from gifted, both young children and older children and adults. You don't know that? You're working that hard? You're not curious about that? Why should you be? It's not that important. Okay, a third characteristic is that you realize that there's a difference between working within time and overtime. And in some ways, and I think this is really true of you as an individual. Are we ever through knowing all we need to know about gifted students? No, no. You have degrees, I have degrees. We have papers that say we graduated, but it doesn't mean you're finished. So it's learning over time. Scholars are learning in time and over time. And I think it's developing some humility, the idea that I can look at somebody and say, I don't know that, or the fact that I can say, which is a truth, that I'm not really good at math. You're not good at math. You're a professor. What does that have to do with it? But to be able to admit that there are things that I'm not as good at as other things, but I'm willing to dabble in math to try to figure it out. And I think it also is not only the humility, but the vision, that scholars have a vision of what they can accomplish. And it transcends just finishing the paper, just turning it in, or just getting a grade. Somebody said to me, well, aren't you finished with that idea? No, I'll never be finished with it. And then the last thing is that there's some directionality, that you see a future to what you're learning, that you see that it has some prominence in something that you're going to do at some other point in time. It doesn't have to be a profession, it could be a hobby, it could be a love of something. So those are the characteristics that I defined are really important as a scholar.
I've heard you talk about intellectual risk. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because that's one of the ones that, I don't know, people may say I'm a risk taker, but I don't think I am.
You're doing this is risk taking. So
Well,
I give you credit for being a risk taker. I think that some of us are only interested in safety, and it's safety to protect our image. And, and I understand that. We all understand these things. And it's easier to talk about than to live them. in some ways. But I think that one of the things that we really talk about as intellectual risk is that you acknowledge the fact that you don't know everything. You acknowledge the fact that you're always hungry. And you acknowledge the fact that what you already know is a key to open up what you don't know. So that you're always using the idea of making relationships. You're always making associations. You're always connecting. And I think those are really important ways to avoid a risk.
Well, what makes it a risk?
And again, I'm not a psychologist, but I think sometimes a risk is the fact that you think it's going to, in some way, um, cause some deterioration of one of your characteristics. So, um, I think you have to get over the fact that those characteristics are there. And, it's kind of like putting makeup on. I can put a lot of makeup on, but the bags are still under my eyes, okay? And that's just the way it is. And you kind of learn to live with it. And I think that risks are really exciting. I mean, I told you I was watching the Olympics, and one of the things I appreciate is people who are willing to take a risk. Even though they're good at it, they're willing to try another venue, another way to, establish what they already know, to try it out in a new situation, to take the risk. The risks are very enjoyable, actually, if you don't see them as something that's going to annihilate you rather than enhance you.
Well, sometimes I think our students, anyway, get worried that they won't get it right. And if it seems risky, they don't want to go there for fear they might not get it right. How can we help parents help their children be okay with maybe not getting it right?
So I'm going to say something that people could argue with me, and I would enjoy that, and I appreciate that. But I think that some of the fear that they're not going to get it right is really a consequence of teachers who teach that. If
Mm,
you're that smart, then why would you get it, you know, wrong? If you're that smart, why should it be difficult for you? If you're that smart, why should it take so much time? So some of what I think are, happens to a gifted student is a consequence of poor understanding by the teacher and poor nomenclature and values by the teacher of what
mhm,
giftedness really means. So, how do we help our students understand that even a teacher can be wrong? Even a teacher can be wrong. And to
mm,
appreciate and value and respect the situation called schooling and the person who's teaching you called the teacher, but to understand that um, you need to also see yourself independent of that without being, obviously getting yourself into trouble. But the teacher expects that you'll do it right and you'll do it quickly. Then
mm.
what do you say to a teacher? I really appreciate what you're saying and your belief in me, but I think I'll need a little bit more time because dot dot dot. I think this is a little bit harder than something other things I do because dot dot dot. So one of the things I really think we've missed is that we haven't explained to gifted students what giftedness really is and what it is not. And I think that's a big mistake. We identify them and push them into a situation, whether it's physical or curricular, and we don't explain it. And therefore, some of the combativeness that gifted kids have towards schooling or toward
Mm.
themselves as not being able to do something is a consequence of, I think, our fault. I'm sorry to say.
No, that's I would completely concur with that and have seen that a lot. And I think that's partly due to misperceptions of what giftedness is on the part of the teacher as well.
And a
So, other,
glorification, I'm sorry, I just had to add this. And of course, you could disagree with me, but it's also, we've kind of glorified giftedness rather than
mm,
giving it a really stable kind of foundation that shows positives and negatives, that shows where it's really useful, where it can be harmful. And I don't mean harmful in terms of physiology, but certainly in terms of psychology and sociology.
yeah. On the other end of the spectrum, sometimes gifted or 2E children will blurt something out and people think they're being arrogant, but to the child, they're just like making an observation and a statement. But others find it offensive. Is there something that parents could do to help their children value accuracy and ability without seeming arrogant toward others?
I think one of the things that I could say, which is an old, old idea, I think my grandmother even told it to me, and that is you treat others as you want them to treat you. And I
Ah,
think to myself, where have we kind of lost that? And as I
mm,
think about some of the dynamics of our society now, I think we need to really be a little bit more mindful that what we say has multiple ramifications. Um, I think I don't know how to help gifted students be able to sift through some of this, without us really talking about it. We can do it through literature. We can,
mm.
lots of different ways we can do it through literature. We can do it through history. I mean, if you've seen Hamilton, you certainly
Yeah,
can make out a lot of these points, which is another thing I want. Look at my shaking my finger here.
that's okay.
That's another thing. I mean, I don't think that we really help students understand what some of the innuendos are, the social, intellectual kinds of innuendos from
Mm,
watching a play like Hamilton or to watch, even Cinderella. I mean,
mm.
wasn't she benign by her own family, well, quote, family members, end quote?
Yeah.
How do people deal with that? And so being able to really help students understand how to be a part of the group without being defensive, how to look at others and not be defensive in terms of their behavior, to try to understand rather than just respond.
That reminds me of what you said a few minutes ago of um, what seems like respecting everybody
Mhm.
for their humanity, regardless of academics and grades and things like that. Can you elaborate on recognizing humanity a little bit? Because that's a little bit psych, social, educational jargony.
It's really very interesting that you bring that up. I've just finished a 5-year grant from the US Department of Education on reading. And one of the things that I was really interested in was reading the standards, I'm sorry, that fell into two different areas. One is character analysis. So one of the things that we do is say, so who's the major character and what are their characteristics? But then we don't talk about the implications of those characteristics, the implications of somebody being shy, or the implications of somebody being very, very bombastic, or the implications of somebody who doesn't know and somebody who thinks they know everything. And we don't take it from the book to the recess period or take it to the lunch, time that we have. We don't carry it over. And so those are wonderful opportunities to really help our students. And then the second thing is the one I mentioned. I was reading that social studies is one of the lost subjects of this day and age. And I think, oh, there's lots being written about, or has been written about that. And I thought, wait a minute, if you do examine, Hamilton and the dialogue, if you do examine some of the elements in history, you'll see how people had different points of view and looked at how they consolidate those points of view into something that represents both groups in a way that's meaningful for everyone. How can we do that in a classroom? We could do that. We could help students learn that.
And we could do that at home, like over the dinner table. What are you reading? Oh,
Exactly.
this. Well, I
Exactly.
read that. What do you think about so and so?
So you want
Is
me to
that
say something? I'm sorry.
what do you think about that for us? Does that relate to us?
But I think you say something that is so important. I don't know how to underscore it enough. Thank you. The dinner table is a schoolroom, and it's an informal schoolroom. And I think that some of our parents who are complaining about or want more for need to look at how that interaction could really be very meaningful in promoting scholarliness, in resolving some issues about, being gifted. It could happen.
Well, I think one of the advantages might be that we can talk to our children and help them reason things out,
Mhm.
um, but they have to kind of take it to heart. So I think that the parents want to model those things too.
Mhm.
So I was just reading this book, and you know what? There was this character that did such and such, and it reminds me of your dad, or whatever.
Mhm.
Yeah,
That's an
definitely.
excellent point. Thank you for bringing that up. That would be a
Well,
great article, The Dinner Table as a Classroom. I love it.
ooh, go for it. I'm busy. So, what do gifted and 2E children have to learn from others? This is a good segue from the dinner table, like from other kids on the playground, from other adults that are in their lives, in addition to their parents.
Somebody said something. First of all, I'm not an expert in 2E, and I know that you know some
Well,
and others who are.
we include them because it's easy to
Absolutely.
adapt online.
And I think we also need to talk about the fact that there are many characteristics of 2E that are like
Yes,
the other characteristics of gifted children in greater
right.
or lesser degree. But I think that one of the things that we could do is to help students understand that um, our, our learning changes in different settings. And so we need to respect the fact that that's just really the way it is. I can talk about that myself. I'm a very different learner in sitting at the ballet, watching it, because I go with a lot of background knowledge than I am at the symphony because I've never played an instrument and I don't really know a lot about music. It doesn't mean that I don't follow the tenets of what a good listener is and what a good participant is in an audience. So, how do I have to be recognized in every place I'm at? Do I then sit there and say, at the symphony, why are they doing ballet and get angry? Or do I accept the fact that different venues have different experiences and tantalize me in different ways? Well, that's one thing. I think the second thing is really to understand that if you're not perfect, you shouldn't expect anybody else to be perfect. And if you accept them as being imperfect, they will accept you as being imperfect. So I saw this at a school. I've been doing a lot of work in early child education. And one of the students said, you draw circles better than but I draw squares better than you. I thought, that's it.
Right.
That's it.
That's great. Yeah. So the setting, I honestly never thought about that. The setting provides different opportunities.
Mhm.
Yeah. So the playground as a classroom too.
Mhm.
Cool.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's a great insight. How might parents continue to be in charge? Sometimes, maybe it was just me with my two kids, but I don't think so. When they got older, it was hard to, if I said something, um, they were really good at arguing me out of things because they could debate sort of,
Mhm.
and that's hard. But the adult usually does have more knowledge and insight about life than the 12-year-old or 13-year-old. But don't know, it was hard. And so if you have any insights about that, how can a person maintain being in charge when the kids, you might feel like your children are smarter than you are?
But you could be smarter than I'm still in charge. I'm still in charge. I'm in charge of your safety. I'm in charge of your well-being, your health. I'm in charge of, I can make the list of the things I'm in charge of. Where we are partners is when we're engaged in some things that are learning, and you may know more and I may know more. For example, this thing in front of me is called a computer, and it's been in front of me for, many years now. We are not good friends. We are not good friends at all. So I know a 10-year-old that can absolutely, you know, do all the stuff that this computer needs to do while I'm still poking around. And that's a good experience. I can learn from you and you can learn from me. There are some things that you can help me with that I really am appreciative of. And there are some things that I can help you with that you need to be appreciative of. And I'm really serious about this. I mean, I think you could even sit down with a student in terms of writing an essay or writing a paragraph, whatever it happens to be. And you can say, I'm really good at spelling, but you're really terrific at ideas. We can work together. I mean, I just think that we don't do enough of that. It's either somebody is dominant and somebody else is subordinate. Why can't we be equal in the learning experience? And then, can I say one other thing? I think I blame a lot of some of the behaviors of gifted students on parents who don't necessarily identify it and stop it. Arrogance is something that is not tolerable. It's not tolerable. And you can't, I've had a parent say to me recently, well, my student, the exact words were, well, my kid told me off and he does know more than I do. Excuse me? Telling you off is not appropriate under any circumstances. Sharing knowledge is very different. But then did you, as the parent, set up the conditions for sharing rather than dictating?
Sharing rather than dictating. It may be that we sometimes get used to sort of dictating, and then when the will of the other person comes along and they can sort of out debate you, but it's not a debate, is it?
No.
Some things, and it might be a cooperation about others, right? Cool. Wonderful.
But I also see parents being very dictatorial, and they need to watch that too. Well, trying to prove that they're the adult. You don't have to prove you're adult. There are other ways to do it besides just espousing information.
Right. This has been wonderful. And now I have a list of questions from our parents who have written in. So are you ready?
Sure.
Okay, here goes nothing. I'm gonna get them up here. And here we go. The first one says, my daughter is very bright, but she doesn't want to do anything that doesn't come easy. She can even freak out, yell, or sob. What should I do? Are there any habits of a scholar that might help?
One of the things I was thinking about, and I've been thinking about this right now because I'm teaching a class at the university, and this came up. And one of the things that I think is so important is to help students understand that what they don't know is an opportunity. It's not a penalty, it's an opportunity. It's an absolute opportunity. So that's one thing. The other thing is that I don't think we give enough kudos to curiosity. Why does it have to be answered right away? That's a great question, Matilda. I don't know the answer, and you may not know the answer. Let's just kind of wait. I think we could think about it for a few minutes, as opposed to making everything laborious to, why don't you know it or how fast can you know it? And I don't know if that answers the question exactly, but we need to have a different frame of reference for not knowing.
Yes, instead of not knowing instantaneously, well, you might not know it yet, but give me 10 minutes, at least, or tomorrow. Yeah.
Exactly.
You mentioned humility a couple of times, and this mom says, what exactly do you mean by academic humility?
Um, I can look at it in three different levels. Great question. Academic humility at one level is the idea that you see it, presented. Somebody says, gee, I never thought I was going to get a Pulitzer Prize in my whole life. you know, I'm so glad that I'm getting it today. So it's really being kind of surprised at your own ability. Academic humility on a more serious vein is the idea that you can, from anything that why can't we always tell people how it fits into something as opposed to just getting kudos for it? Gee, I learned about weather and it fits into my interest in, or it fits in to my questions about, or it fits into what I might do when I grow up. So I think that's a way of developing humility. And then the other thing is, I don't think we've read enough biographies to understand that anyone who's been successful has also been successful because they had some thread of humility, that they knew they didn't know it all and kept pushing forward, whether it's a great artist or whether it happens to be a great scientist or whether it happens to be an astronaut. They never think they know it all. That's why they're interested in learning more. So humility is really a stimulus. It shouldn't be a plug.
Thank you. My son is 11. He knows a lot about a lot of things, but he doesn't like school. Is there something we could do at home that might help him want to learn?
So I don't know if this is the right time to say this, but um, we eat spinach and we don't like it all the time, but it's it's helpful. So I mean, I think sometimes as parents, we try to talk the students into loving school. You can dislike school. That's okay. That's fine. But do you dislike learning? Is that what you're really saying? So what
Ah,
are we really talking about? And yes, school has its, why can't we acknowledge? School has its assets and it has its liabilities. It really does. I mean, I feel that way even as an adult when I go to a class. So why can't we acknowledge that and simply say, however, let's list all the things that we do like. I mean, somebody was just saying to me, I love chocolate chip ice cream. I hate cones. Does that mean you're never going to eat ice cream again? Or does it mean that you find another way to serve yourself ice cream? So you can't quite do that because I can't keep you out of school. But you can learn how to use that time within school. Are you asking enough questions? Are you bringing up another point of view? Are you looking at when it's free time that you're engaging yourself in something that's productive? Have you talked to the teacher about maybe you need to sit closer, further away, whatever?
so to some extent, students might be able to speak up for themselves and ask for something
Mm-hmm,
that they're craving.
mm-hmm.
And also, I love your ice cream and the cone analogy. I'm particular about what kind of ice cream cone.
That's okay. But it's nice to have something you serve it on.
And I love mint chip. Um, Next parent says, in the habits of a scholar, I guess you must have said something about recording information or note taking or something. And she's asking, in this day of computers where you can just look things up in seconds, is note taking really necessary?
That's really kind of interesting. And I understand what that person is saying. I appreciate that. But we save notes for the fact that we really like it. I mean, I have picture books. I don't mean that. I have photograph albums. Why did I keep all those? I kept them because they meant something to me. So I try to explain to students that note taking is like savoring something. It's a way of really falling in love with an idea and wanting to write it down and save it. Now, how
Mm.
long you're going to save it or clean out your note, is a whole other thing. But for the time being, that saving it is because you enjoy it. It has some relevance for you. Second thing is there is some particular studies that show that the kinesthetic process of writing your notes or even typing your notes and seeing them
Mm.
really facilitates memory. So maybe that would be something to help the student understand. But I like the idea that you fall in love with something and you want to keep it for a while.
Yeah, I love the idea that note taking is a way to savor things and to keep them um, for later when you might want to look at them again, like your photo albums.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Well, next one says, my child jumps right into something without thinking about it very much. He thinks he's got good idea, but a lot of the time it turns out that it's more complicated than he thought, and then he gives up. What
Hmm.
can we as parents do to help him maybe make better choices or to not give up?
That's a hard one. That's really very hard. I think there's another thing to think about though, because I don't really have a good solution for this. But maybe we need to talk about the idea of when you get stuck, to really examine why you get stuck. Did you get stuck because it's too hard? Did you get stuck because it's not interesting? Did you get stuck because you didn't see its purpose? Did you get stuck because it's lonely? Incidentally, we've never really talked about the fact that being studious is also sometimes very lonely. And some of our
Yes.
gifted kids, you know, don't want that isolation. Although one student once said to me, my best friend is Mr. Study. So I don't know, I guess you could look at it either way. But I think we need to say is another thing. There are things that, look, everybody, and all these parents as well as kids, have an unfinished product, right? I have
Mhm.
something that I was knitting that I have not finished yet, and it's been about a year and a half. Maybe we need a rest. Maybe we put it aside for a while. We examine
Ah,
what it is that made us put it aside with the idea that we will pick it up. We can even have a date if it's a student, a younger child. We could pick it up on that particular date and see if we can then immerse ourselves in it. Because sometimes it does. It's enough is enough.
so looking at why you stop is important.
Hmm.
And then maybe taking a break is also important.
And looking at why you stopped in relationship to why you started.
Ah, good point. Very good point. So, following up on something you just said, here's one. My son did a lot of things like what you talked about when he was in elementary school, but other kids were mean to him about it. And starting around middle school, it got worse. It seems like the more years he's in school, the less he wants to be like that. I assume she means scholarly. But now high school is coming, and his grades matter for college. Is there a way to get it back? I think that it means the
Mhm.
love of learning.
I think one of the things we also need to examine is how much pressure parents put on their own children. Like, you know, college. College is really important, and you have to have good grades. College is really important. You have to have good grades. I mean, I can't tell you because I do a lot of work in the schools. I can't tell you how many students are in, second, third grade telling me, does this count for college? No, come on. So we need to kind of help students understand that there is an array of factors that college is looking at. Sometimes it's your achievement in something that has nothing to do with necessarily those courses you've taken, things you've done outside of school and so forth. But anyway, I think that it's worth a good talk more than anything else. And
Hmm.
maybe we need to also do a couple of other things. Why can't we talk to school counselors and bring a student to a school counselor and say, he doesn't seem to really understand. I don't need to say it in quite that way, but how can you help him understand a little bit more about the relationship between school and going to the university or going to a college? Can you help them understand? And do we help the student understand that if I wanted to be a doctor, there's no way I could have done that unless I went to school. Society doesn't allow that. You have to have licenses and things like that. I don't think some of our kids understand that. And I was talking to a student who said, I want to become an engineer. And he was talking about an electrical engineer. And so I didn't say it, but the other teacher who was talking to him said, you have to have licenses for that. What's that? You have to have certain kinds of things that show that you understand. Otherwise, you could hurt yourself and everybody else. Oh my gosh. So, maybe we need to explain why we go to college and not just look at grades as being important. We go to fulfill some destiny, some interest, some ability we have.
So the last of our parent questions, thank you for that. I think figuring out why it's important to do whatever it is you're doing instead of just doing it because somebody said you're supposed to is hugely helpful, particularly for someone who questions everything and their mind's going 700 miles an hour most of the time. So our last question says, this seems pretty philosophical. How do you know that these kinds of things really work?
I don't. No, of course not. But I need to say something. I kind of want to blame parents a little bit of 3 things or 4 things. And so when it's blaming them out of the fact that they can do this, they can. One is, I meet parents that don't show any curiosity themselves. We get so busy and I know, because I know, in driving and dropping kids off and going shopping and making sure that the air conditioning is working. But do we show curiosity? And then we wonder why our students aren't more curious. I mean,
Mm.
that's one thing. Just saying to the child, I won't believe this. Look what I just saw about such and such in the LA Times or whatever you read. The second thing is that we're not taking our students into the world enough to really show them what the world has to offer. I mean, I was teaching at a school that is 8 blocks from a very famous museum, and none of the parents in the group had taken their students there. Their children there. I said, why not? They said, oh, we don't have enough time. But the museum is a place to learn together. Whether it happens to be a park or a museum or reading a story together. But if you can help students really understand, there's learning everywhere. And we learn too as adults. I learn all the time. So do the parents. And then the last thing is to understand that the process of going to school can be like anything else, like cleaning the house. It's work sometimes. Okay, it's work. Sometimes it's easier work than others, but we all understand work as opposed to saying to a student, well, school is just the best thing that will ever happen to you. It may not be the best thing that ever will happen to you. Cleaning may not be the best thing that will ever happen. Just to help students understand some of the realities, developing curiosity, looking at understanding the world and learning from it, not just in school, and understanding that what we learn today has implications for tomorrow. You don't
I
think I'm
think
just hysterical?
I think collecting sort of what we've been saying about the dinner table, the playground, the museum, learning isn't philosophical, it's life.
Exactly. And we can't blame it all on school and leave it all to school. We just can't.
No. Well, do you have any last words of wisdom and insight or tips for our parents?
Yes, I think it's really wonderful that we can in our society acknowledge people that are advanced and gifted and the characteristics that they possess: curiosity, abstract thinking, the long attention span. Why can't we pay more attention to the characteristics and what they mean at home, in the scouts, at the dance studio, as well as school? And why can't we appreciate those characteristics without attributing a grade to them. You know, I think people sometimes think, well, if you're gifted, you should have all grades. No, if you're gifted, you should be developing curiosity, creativity, problem solving, critical thinking, the ability to learn from the world in which you live all the time.
I'm always taken aback by your insights and processing what you're saying. And I so appreciate the time that you've given to spend with our families and parents. And I guess I could talk to you all day long, but that about wraps it up. And I want to thank you very, very much for all the years that you've contributed to my education and what you've now given to many other people and to the millions probably of people that you've served so far, and looking forward to what has yet to come. So
Thank
thank
you
you,
for letting
Sandy.
me talk about my passion. I appreciate that.
Well, it's mine too. So we have that in common.
Good.
Well,
That I knew.
stay safe, be well.
Thanks a lot.
Bye
Thanks
for
for the
now.
opportunity. See you soon.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.
Bye.